He did not know it yet, but the sound that woke him would save 2 lives before sunrise. At 12:17 a.m., in the quiet edge of Pine Harbor, Oregon, Sergeant Jason Cole opened his eyes to a howl so low and sorrowful it seemed to come from beneath the earth. For a moment, he did not move. He lay still beneath the thin gray blanket, one hand resting near the old dog tags on his nightstand, listening as the sound stretched through the small rental house and faded into the wind. Outside, the December night pressed cold against the windows. Rain tapped softly on the roof. Somewhere beyond the backyard fence, pine branches scraped together like tired bones. Then the howl came again, longer this time, higher at the end. Not fear, not pain, a warning. Jason sat up. Across the room, Ghost stood near the front door, his white German shepherd coat glowing faintly in the moonlight that slipped through the blinds. He was 6 years old, broad-chested and steady, with pale fur thick as winter wool and amber eyes that missed nothing. One ear carried a small notch from a training accident years ago, back when he and Jason still wore the same dust, heard the same alarms, and trusted each other more than sleep. Ghost did not bark. That was what made Jason's chest tighten. Ghost barked at raccoons. He barked at delivery trucks. He barked once, very politely, when the mailman came too close to the porch. But this was different. The dog stood frozen, nose pointed toward the door, tail still, paws planted as if holding a line no one else could see. Jason swung his feet onto the floor. The boards were cold under his soles. He was 38, though some mornings his body felt older, built wide through the shoulders, his dark skin marked by small pale scars he rarely explained, his beard trimmed close, his hair cropped short the way the Corps had taught him to keep things simple. People in town knew him as the quiet Marine who fixed engines at Mercer's Auto and walked the white dog before dawn. They did not know about the nights he woke reaching for men who were no longer there. They did not know that silence could weigh more than body armor. Ghost knew. Ghost had always known. Jason reached for the flannel shirt hanging on the chair and pulled it over his t-shirt. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. Ghost turned his head. Their eyes met. There were commands Jason had taught him years ago. Sit. Stay. Search. Heal. But the look Ghost gave him now was not obedience waiting for permission. It was a plea. Not loud. Not frantic. Certain. Jason felt the old instinct move through him, slow and clean, like a match struck in a dark room. He stood, slipped into his boots, grabbed his heavy jacket from the peg by the door, and took the flashlight from the kitchen drawer. The house smelled faintly of coffee grounds, cedar, and the rain dampening the porch steps. It should have felt ordinary. Safe. But Ghost was already nosing the latch, his breath fogging against the glass. "Easy," Jason murmured, though he was not sure whether he was speaking to the dog or to himself. He opened the door. Cold air rushed in, sharp with wet pine and sea salt drifting from the coast 3 miles west. Ghost stepped out first, quiet as smoke. Jason followed, pulling the door shut behind him. The porch light flickered once above them. Across the narrow street, the other houses slept behind dark windows and drawn curtains. A blue recycling bin rolled gently against the curb with every push of wind. Nothing moved. Nothing called. Still, Ghost walked down the steps and stopped at the edge of the yard, staring toward the old service road beyond the line of trees. Jason knew that road. Everyone in Pine Harbor did. It led past the abandoned cannery, the closed lumber office, and the empty storage sheds near the creek, places the town kept forgetting to tear down because forgetting was cheaper. Ghost looked back once, then moved. Not running. Leading. Jason followed through the gate, flashlight beam cutting a pale tunnel through the rain. Gravel crunched under his boots. Water gathered in the seams of the road, reflecting pieces of broken moon. The wind pushed through the pines, carrying the smell of mud, rusted metal, and something else Jason could not name. A thin sound threaded through the dark, so soft he almost missed it. Not a cry. Not yet. More like a breath trying not to disappear. Ghost stopped ahead of him, lifted his muzzle, and howled once more into the midnight. And this time Jason heard an answer from somewhere beyond the trees. The answer came so faintly that Jason wondered if the wind had invented it. He stood still on the service road, rain ticking against the shoulders of his jacket, flashlight trembling just enough to make the trees look alive. Ghost did not move. The white shepherd faced the dark line of pines beyond the old cannery fence, ears high, body lowered, every muscle listening. Jason held his breath. There it was again. A small sound. Thin. Human. Then gone. The old part of him wanted to move fast, but the wiser part, the part that had learned how fragile a frightened soul could be, made him slow down. I hear it, he whispered. Ghost glanced back, just once, as if to say he had heard it first. They left the gravel road and crossed into the wet grass beside the cannery property. The place had been closed for nearly 12 years, after the fishery moved operations south, and the town stopped pretending the building could be saved. Its metal siding had gone dull with salt air. Vines crawled over the loading dock. A torn tarp snapped against a chain-link gate with a soft, tired rhythm. The smell of rust and creek water hung heavy there, mixed with old wood, moss, and the cold breath of the Pacific drifting inland. Jason raised the flashlight. The beam passed over a faded sign, a row of broken pallets, a red door chained shut, and then Ghost slipped under a gap in the fence without hesitation. Ghost, Jason said quietly. The dog stopped on the other side and looked at him through the rain. Not guilty. Not sorry. Waiting. Jason pushed down on the loose section of fence, careful of the bent wire, and stepped through. His boots sank into mud nearly an inch deep. Somewhere close, water dripped steadily from a roof gutter into a metal drum. Plink, 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 like a clock counting down. Ghost moved toward the back of the property, past the cannery wall, and toward a row of storage sheds near Miller Creek. Jason followed, sweeping the flashlight low. He saw raccoon tracks, leaves plastered to concrete, a child's pink mitten caught on a nail near a broken crate. He froze. The mitten was soaked through, tiny, no bigger than his palm. Jason crouched and picked it up between two fingers. For a second, the whole night seemed to narrow around that small piece of cloth. Ghost gave a quiet whine. Jason looked at him. Somebody is out here, he said, his voice barely more than breath. Ghost turned sharply and trotted ahead to the third shed, the one closest to the creek. Its roof sagged in the middle. One side had pulled away from the frame, leaving a black gap near the ground. The door was blocked by a fallen sheet of plywood, but the bottom corner had been shifted just enough for something small to crawl through. Jason knelt near the opening. The smell changed. Not just mud now. Damp fabric. Cold air. Fear. He placed the flashlight against the ground and angled the beam inside. At first he saw only darkness, then a shape, then another. A shoe. A backpack. A pale little hand resting on a bundle of blankets. Jason's chest tightened so suddenly he had to steady himself against the plywood. Hey, he said softly. My name is Jason. I am here to help. Nothing moved. Ghost lowered himself onto his belly and inched forward, nose close to the gap. He did not bark. He made a sound Jason had only heard a few times before, a low, gentle rumble that felt less like warning and more like prayer. Inside the shed, the bundle shifted. A child's voice answered, dry and careful. Do not come too fast. Jason closed his eyes for one heartbeat. Not because he was afraid, because the voice was so small and so brave that it broke something open in him. I will not, he said. I promise. He slid the flashlight a little closer, keeping the beam away from her eyes. Now he could see her, a girl, maybe 9 years old, sitting against the far wall with her back straight despite the cold. Her brown hair was damp and tangled around her face. Her cheeks were pale from the night air. She wore a yellow raincoat too thin for December, and in her arms she held a baby wrapped in a gray sweatshirt. The baby was quiet, but Jason could see the small rise and fall beneath the cloth. Alive. The girl had placed her own scarf around the baby's head and tucked both of her bare hands underneath to keep him warm. One of her mittens was missing. The other hung by a string from her sleeve. Ghost pressed closer to the opening. The girl looked at him first, not Jason. Her eyes widened, not with panic, but recognition, as if she had been waiting for that white shape to appear out of the dark. He came back, she whispered. Jason looked from her to Ghost. Rain slid down the side of his face. You have seen him before? The girl nodded slowly. By the creek. He heard me when nobody else did. Her voice shook, but she did not cry. She looked down at the baby and pulled him tighter against her chest. Please help my brother first. Jason felt the words settle in the cold shed like a candle being lit. Not help me. Not I am scared. Help my brother first. Ghost rested his chin in the mud at the edge of the opening, amber eyes fixed on the girl, still as a guardian carved from snow. Jason reached for his radio, but the signal light blinked weakly in the rain. No service. The storm had swallowed the tower again. He looked toward the road, then back at the shed, judging the plywood, the narrow gap, the sagging roof, the creek rising behind them. The water was closer than it should have been, whispering over stones in the dark. He could not wait for help to find them. He would have to bring them out himself. Listen to me, Jason said, steady and low. I am going to move this board. Slowly. Ghost is going to stay right here with you. You are doing good. You are doing better than most grown people I know. The girl swallowed. My name is Lila. Jason nodded, and somehow that name made the whole night more real. Lila, he said gently. You already did the hard part. You kept him warm. Now let me do mine. Jason set both hands against the edge of the plywood and tested its weight. It shifted with a wet groan, scraping softly over the muddy ground, and Lila tightened her arms around the baby without making a sound. Ghost stayed exactly where Jason had placed him, belly low, front paws at the opening, his white coat darkening under the rain. He watched Lila the way he used to watch doors overseas, not with fear, but with purpose. Jason moved the board an inch, then another. The shed creaked above them. Old nails complained in the wood. He stopped each time the roof answered, listening for any change, any sign that the little shelter had given all it had left to give. You are doing fine, he said. Lila nodded, though her lips had turned pale. His name is Noah, she whispered. Jason looked at the small bundle in her arms. That is a strong name. Mom said it means rest. Her voice thinned at the edges. He has not rested much tonight. The words landed gently, but they carried the whole weight of the dark. Jason swallowed and pulled the plywood farther until the gap widened enough for his shoulders. Cold air rushed into the shed. Lila flinched, then leaned over Noah, using her own body as a wall against the wind. Jason saw it clearly then. The girl was shivering so hard her small shoulders trembled under the yellow raincoat. Yet every motion she made was for the baby. The scarf was tucked with careful hands. The sweatshirt was wrapped high around his ears. Her knees were muddy from bracing herself against the wet floor. She had been afraid. She had been freezing. But she had stayed. Lila, Jason said, keeping his voice low. I am going to take Noah first. Then I am coming right back for you. I will not leave you in here. Her eyes searched his face. Children learned quickly when adults meant a promise and when they only borrowed one to calm the room. Jason held still and let her look. The rain softened for a moment, and in that pause, the only sound was Ghost breathing near the opening. Lila finally nodded. He does not like strangers, she said. That is all right, Jason replied. I will introduce myself real careful. He reached in slowly, palms open. Hello, Noah. My name is Jason Cole. Your sister has been doing an outstanding job. Something about the formality of it made Lila's mouth tremble. Almost a smile, almost tears. She loosened the bundle with reluctance, so deep it looked like pain, and Jason took the baby against his chest, immediately folding his jacket around him. Noah stirred, let out a soft breath, and tucked his face toward the warmth. No crying, no struggle, just the quiet trust of someone too small to understand how close the night had come. Jason looked down at him and felt the old emptiness in his ribs shift. I have got him, he said. I have got him good. Ghost rose when Jason backed out of the shed, then stepped beside him, nose lifting to Noah's covered head. The dog gave one gentle sniff and turned back toward Lila, as if counting the living. Jason laid Noah inside the dry hollow of his jacket, close against his chest, then reached back for Lila. Your turn. She tried to crawl forward and stopped, her fingers curling against the floor. Her strength had run out while no one was watching. Jason saw embarrassment flash across her face, that terrible little shame children sometimes carry when they have been brave too long. I cannot, she whispered. Yes, you can, Jason said. Not by yourself. With me. Ghost moved first. He slid his head through the gap and pressed his warm muzzle against Lila's hand. She looked at him, and something in her finally broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. A single tear slipped down her cheek and disappeared under her chin. She placed her hand in Ghost's fur. I thought he was an angel, she said. Jason did not correct her. There were nights when truth was bigger than names. He braced one knee in the mud and reached both arms inside. Hold on to my sleeve. Lila obeyed. Jason lifted carefully, easing her through the opening while shielding Noah with his other arm. The girl was lighter than she should have been, all cold raincoat and trembling bones, but her grip was fierce. The moment she cleared the shed, Ghost pressed against her side, steadying her before she could sink into the mud. Jason lowered her onto an old wooden pallet away from the puddles and wrapped the rest of his jacket around both children. The wind moved across the yard, carrying the creek's damp warning. Water rushed louder now behind the sheds, swollen by the night rain. Jason turned his flashlight toward Miller Creek. The narrow bank had nearly vanished. Silver water slipped over the grass and crept toward the cannery yard. They had minutes, maybe less, before the route back became dangerous. He checked his radio again. Static. His phone showed one thin bar, then none. Pine Harbor slept on the other side of the trees, warm and unaware. Lila followed his eyes and understood enough to be afraid. Are we stuck? She asked. Jason looked at Ghost. The dog was staring toward the old service road, ears pitched forward, body angled not the way they had come, but toward the loading dock on the far side of the cannery. Jason knew that look. Ghost had found another path. No, Jason said, lifting Noah closer and offering Lila his free hand. We are not stuck. We are just taking the long way home. Lila stood on shaky legs. Ghost stepped ahead, white against the rain-dark yard, and led them toward the shadowed building as the creek began to rise behind them. Ghost led them toward the cannery wall with the quiet certainty of a creature following a map no human eyes could read. Jason kept Noah tucked against his chest beneath the open sides of his jacket, one arm firm around the baby, the other hand holding Lila's small fingers inside his palm. She stumbled once in the mud, and Jason felt how little strength she had left. He slowed without saying so. Pride could be fragile in children who had already carried too much. Step where I step, he told her. One boot print at a time. Lila nodded, her wet hair clinging to her cheeks, her yellow raincoat flashing dimly whenever the flashlight beam swung back toward her. Behind them, Miller Creek spoke louder, no longer whispering over stones but pushing through the grass with a restless, swollen sound. The storage shed they had left behind looked smaller now, half swallowed by dark rain and moving water. Jason did not let himself stare at it. There were things a man could feel later. Not now. Not while two children still needed the next breath to be warmer than the last. Ghost stopped at the loading dock behind the cannery, where a rusted metal ramp slanted up toward a service door. The ramp was slick with rain, patched with moss, and covered in old pine needles blown down from the trees. Hey, faded number 4 had been painted on the wall years ago, barely visible beneath the salt stains. Jason lifted the flashlight. The service door stood open by 3 inches. Not enough for a man. Enough for a dog's nose to find. Ghost pushed gently, and the door gave a long, low creak that rolled through the empty building like a memory waking up. Lila tightened her grip. Is it safe? Jason looked into the black interior. The smell of the place came out first. Cold concrete, old machinery, dust dampened by years of coastal fog. Somewhere inside, a loose cable tapped against metal. Safer than the creek, he said. It was not a perfect answer, but it was true. Ghost stepped through first. Jason followed, turning sideways to fit while keeping Noah shielded close. Lila came after him, one hand on the back of his shirt, the other buried in Ghost's wet fur. Inside, the cannery was almost completely dark. The flashlight made the building appear in pieces: steel tables, empty hooks, stacked crates, a cracked office window, puddles reflecting the beam like small black mirrors. Rain drummed on the wide roof overhead. The sound was steady, enormous, as if they were walking under the inside of a drum. Jason remembered places like this from another life. Buildings that looked empty but were full of corners, full of echoes, full of the feeling that someone had left in a hurry and never returned. He pushed the memory away. We need the front exit, he said. It opens near Front Street. From there, Mercer's Auto is 6 blocks. There is a landline in the office. Lila looked up at him. You know this place? I fixed the owner's truck once, Jason said. He paid me in cash and stale peppermint candy. For the first time, Lila gave a tiny breath that almost became a laugh. It faded quickly, but Jason heard it. So did Ghost. The dog's tail moved once, gentle and low, before he continued ahead. They passed through the processing floor, stepping around puddles and broken boards. Jason tested every plank before Lila crossed it. Noah stirred beneath the jacket and made a small sound, soft as a kitten. Lila stopped instantly. Is he cold? He is warmer than he was, Jason said. He is close to me. That helps. He likes being held tight. Most of us do, Jason said before he could stop himself. The word surprised him. They hung there in the old building, simple and honest. Lila looked at him differently after that, not as a rescuer made of uniform and flashlight, but as a person who understood something about being cold on the inside. Ghost turned a corner near the office corridor, then froze. His ears lifted. Jason stopped behind him, heart tightening in the old familiar way. What is it? Lila whispered. Ghost did not growl. He listened. Jason angled the flashlight down the hallway and saw the problem. The far end of the corridor had partially flooded. Rainwater had pushed in under a broken side door, spreading across the floor in a shallow, shining sheet. It was not deep, but it covered everything, hiding nails, glass, gaps in the concrete, whatever the dark wanted to keep. The front exit lay beyond it. Jason felt the shape of the choice settle on his shoulders. Carry Noah. Guide Lila. Trust Ghost. One slow crossing. That was all. We can do this, he said. Lila swallowed hard. What if I fall? Jason crouched enough to meet her eyes. Then I pick you up. What if you fall? The question was so quiet it nearly disappeared beneath the rain. Jason looked at Ghost, then at Noah's sleeping face under the jacket. Then Ghost will remind me I am not allowed to. Lila stared at the dog. Ghost looked back at her with solemn patience, rainwater dripping from his whiskers, white fur glowing in the flashlight haze. She nodded once. Jason stepped into the water first. Cold seeped around his boots. He moved carefully, feeling for solid ground. Ghost walked just ahead, placing each paw with deliberate care, then pausing for Lila to copy him. The girl followed in the dog's steps, one hand in Jason's, one hand brushing Ghost's back whenever fear rose too close. Halfway across, the building groaned as wind pressed against the old walls. A door slammed somewhere behind them, loud enough to make Lila gasp. Noah woke and began to fuss beneath Jason's jacket. Jason steadied both children with nothing but his hands and his voice. Almost there, he said. Keep breathing. Keep walking. Follow the white dog. Ghost reached the dry strip of floor near the front exit and turned around. He did not leave them. He stood waiting, a pale shape in the dark, as if the whole storm had been sent against him and found him unmoved. Lila took the final step out of the water, then another, and suddenly she was on dry concrete. Jason lifted her hand to the wall so she could lean there, then adjusted Noah higher against his chest. The baby quieted again, cheek pressed into warmth. Ahead, the front door waited beneath an old red exit sign with no light left inside it. Jason pushed the handle. It did not move. He tried again, locked from the outside. For one long second, no one spoke. Rain hammered the roof. The creek roared behind the building. Then Ghost lowered his head, sniffed the seam beneath the door, and turned sharply toward the small office on the left. Jason followed the dog's gaze and saw what he had missed before. A narrow window above the office desk, cracked open just enough to let in the smell of wet pavement and the faintest sound of a distant passing truck. Jason stepped into the office with Ghost close at his knee and Lila holding the back of his shirt as if it were a rope stretched across deep water. The room smelled of old paper, mildew, and the sharp metal scent of rain blowing through the cracked window. A desk sat crooked in the corner, its drawers half open, its surface covered with dust except where water had made dark circles beneath the sill. Above it, the narrow window rattled in the wind. Beyond the glass, Jason could see Front Street, blurred by rain and darkness, and the faint red glow of a traffic light swinging at the far intersection. Civilization was close enough to see, still too far to touch. He set the flashlight on the desk and shifted Noah carefully against his chest. The baby's small face was tucked beneath the collar of Jason's jacket, warm breath brushing the fabric in uneven little puffs. Lila watched every movement. Even exhausted, even shaking, she kept count of her brother the way Ghost kept count of doors. Jason noticed that and felt a deep ache move through him, not sadness exactly, but respect. He is still doing okay, he said before she asked. Lila nodded, though her eyes shone in the flashlight glow. He gets scared when it is too quiet. Jason looked around the old office, listening to rain strike the roof and wind move through the cannery walls. Then we will not let it get too quiet. He turned to Ghost. Stay close. Ghost gave one soft huff and settled beside Lila, pressing his wet shoulder against her leg. She slid one hand into the thick fur at his neck. The dog stood still for it, accepting the weight of her trust like it had always belonged there. Jason tested the window. It stuck halfway, swollen by years of salt air and neglect. He pushed harder. The frame groaned, but did not rise. He glanced down at the desk. The old chair beside it had metal legs and a cracked vinyl seat. He dragged it over without scraping too loudly, climbed up, and braced one hand on the wall. The window was high, narrow, but not impossible. If he could open it, he could call out. Maybe wave down the truck. Maybe get a signal. Maybe carry one child at a time through if he had to. He pushed again. Nothing. Rain sprayed his face through the gap. Outside, the truck's sound faded, tires hissing away on wet pavement. Jason closed his eyes for one heartbeat. Too late for that one. Not too late for the next. Sergeant. Lila's voice was small behind him. The word stopped him. Not Mr. Not Sir. Sergeant. Like she had decided he needed his strongest name. He looked back. Yes, ma'am. Are you scared? The question was honest. Children had a way of asking what adults spent years walking around. Jason climbed down slowly. He could have said no. He had said no many times in his life because people needed him steady, because uniforms did not leave much room for trembling, because some rooms were easier to survive if no one knew what lived inside you. But Lila had been honest with the dark. She deserved the same. A little, he said. Her fingers tightened in Ghost's fur. Me too. That means we are paying attention. She considered this, then nodded as if he had given her a rule she could use. Jason looked around the room again. The landline sat on. The desk, beige, square, coated in dust. He had missed it before because the cord disappeared behind a fallen stack of folders. He picked up the receiver. No tone. He followed the cord with the flashlight and found it pulled loose from the wall jack, the end lying in a puddle. Not broken, just disconnected. He wiped the plug with his sleeve, dried the jack as best he could, and pushed it in. For a second, nothing. Then a thin sound hummed through the receiver. A dial tone. Jason almost laughed, but it came out like a breath he had been holding since midnight. Thank you, he whispered, not loud enough to turn it into a speech, just enough for the room to hear. Lila looked up. Does it work? It works. He dialed 911 with slow, careful fingers. The call clicked, rang once, and a woman's voice answered, clear and calm as a lantern. 911. What is your emergency? Jason gave his name, his location, the children's condition, the rising creek, the locked front door, the safest access point from Front Street. His voice changed as he spoke. It became precise, measured, marine steady. The dispatcher stayed with him, asking questions, giving instructions, telling him units were on the way from Pine Harbor Fire and County Emergency Medical Services. 8 minutes, maybe 10 with the weather. Jason looked at Lila when he heard that. 10 minutes could be a lifetime in a storm. It could also be mercy. We are going to keep them warm, the dispatcher said. Keep the baby close to your body. Keep the girl sitting if she is weak. Help is coming. Copy that, Jason said, then softened his voice. Thank you. He hung up only after she told him to if staying on the line became unsafe, and the old office seemed less abandoned afterward. Not safe. Not yet. But witnessed. Jason took the dusty curtains from the window, shook them once, and wrapped them around Lila's shoulders over the yellow raincoat. They smelled old, but they were dry enough. She did not complain. Ghost sat beside her, and she leaned against him with the careful surrender of someone finally allowed to be tired. Jason crouched in front of her. Lila, I need to ask you something. How did you and Noah end up out here? Her face changed. Not fear exactly. More like a door closing halfway. We were walking to Mrs. Bell's house, she said. She lives near the church. Mom knows her. From where? From the motel by the highway. Jason listened without interrupting. Rainwater ran down the office window in crooked lines. The storm got worse. Noah was crying. I thought the cannery had a roof. I only meant to wait until the rain slowed down. She looked down at her hands. One bare, one mittened. Then the creak came up, and the door would not open, and my phone died. Jason nodded slowly, absorbing each piece without judgment. You kept your brother alive. Lila shook her head, quick and embarrassed. I just held him. Sometimes that is the whole mission. The words left him softer than he expected. Ghost lifted his head, ears turning toward the hallway. Jason heard it a second later. Not sirens. Not yet. A different sound. A dull pop from somewhere deep in the cannery, followed by the long, shifting moan of water pushing against old wood. The building trembled under their feet. Lila went still. Jason stood, already lifting Noah closer. Ghost rose too, body angled between the children and the dark hallway. Then, from beyond the office door, water began sliding across the concrete toward them, thin at first, then wider, shining in the flashlight beam like the night had found another way in. Jason shifted his weight to keep Noah pressed against his chest as the creeping water swirled beneath his boots. Ghost pressed close to Lila, white fur slick and glistening in the flashlight beam, ears forward, tail low, a constant presence between them and the encroaching dark. The creek had grown wider, spilling over the edge of the yard and brushing the concrete of the old cannery floor. Jason tested each step carefully, listening to the soft squelch beneath his boots, feeling the uneven ground, imagining the hidden cracks and weak boards. Lila followed exactly, hands gripping his sleeve and Ghost's fur in a rhythm as deliberate as breathing. The flashlight illuminated puddles, reflections of the broken overhead lights, and the long shadows cast by the twisted machinery. Each shadow seemed alive, bending toward them, but Jason's focus stayed steady, anchored to the children and the dog guiding them. He could hear the wind moving through the broken siding, rain dripping from the metal roof above, mixing with the soft, rhythmic pulse of water against the building's edge. Ghost sniffed each step, then paused, head lifting to the ceiling as if listening to a message only he could understand. Jason froze, following the line of the dog's vision. A small drip from the roof fell directly onto the wooden floor, sounding like a single note in a silent song. He smiled faintly to himself, acknowledging the dog's patience and timing. Jason set Noah a little higher against his chest, ensuring the baby's head was tucked safely, warm against his coat. Lila's small hand rested on the baby's back, cautious, tentative, but present. Jason felt a quiet satisfaction at that gesture, a proof of courage that did not need words. He continued forward toward the office window Ghost had indicated, stepping carefully, adjusting each movement for the slippery floor. The light from the narrow window provided a faint path forward, but the building's interior was otherwise dark, filled with the smell of damp concrete, wet paper, and cold metal. Jason moved the desk chair closer, testing its stability, then lifted Noah slightly, keeping him safe from any hidden wet patches on the floor. He set the baby down gently on the chair seat and reached for Lila's hand. "We are going to step together," he whispered. She nodded, her face set with resolve but tempered by exhaustion. Ghost led, brushing against the back of Jason's boots to ensure alignment. Jason held Lila's hand tightly as he guided her toward the narrow window ledge, teaching her to place each foot carefully. The water continued to rise subtly, pressing against the building from behind, a reminder that time and tide were not waiting. Lila's breaths were shallow but steady. She looked to Ghost as reassurance, and the dog responded with a gentle nudge of the nose, a silent instruction to trust. Jason climbed the ledge first, balancing Noah on his hip, keeping him secure beneath the jacket, then extended his hand for Lila. She grabbed it, her small fingers intertwining with his, and he felt her grip tighten with equal parts fear and determination. Step by careful step, they navigated the ledge, Ghost walking just ahead, guiding them toward the edge of the window opening. The cold December air flowed through the gap, brushing against Jason's face, whipping through Lila's hair. He counted each breath, each careful motion, matching it with hers. The window frame creaked, but held. The city lights beyond flickered dimly, far away, obscured by rain, but enough to promise that help was near. Jason moved Noah closer to his chest, ensuring warmth and protection, then drew Lila through the narrow opening. Ghost immediately settled next to them, standing guard as they both landed safely on the ground outside. Rain fell in sheets, soaking their coats and hair, but for the first time that night, Jason allowed himself a moment to feel relief, subtle, but absolute. He adjusted Noah in his arms, wrapping him as best as he could in his jacket, while Lila pressed close against Ghost, finding warmth and comfort in the dog's steady presence. The storm's noise continued around them, but inside the small circle of their survival, a calm had emerged, a quiet certainty that they had made it through the worst of the night. Jason looked at the children and the dog, and though no words were needed, a profound understanding passed among them. The guidance of the dog, the trust of the girl, the fragile strength of the baby, and the steadfastness of the man had converged to carry them safely through the dark and the rain, step by careful step, toward the first real sign of human aid beyond the cannery. Jason led Lila and Noah down the wet street, each step measured, every movement deliberate, as though the rhythm of their feet could keep the storm at bay. Ghost trotted ahead, white fur slicked with rain, ears alert, tail low, guiding them toward the faint glow of Front Street and the distant hum of emergency lights. The creek's murmur had faded behind the buildings, replaced by the steady slap of rain against pavement and the occasional swish of a car passing in the distance. Jason felt the cold, rain soaking through his jacket, but the warmth of Noah against his chest and the quiet presence of Lila at his side grounded him. "Keep your eyes on Ghost," he whispered to her. She did, and the dog's steady pace gave her confidence to move through the slick asphalt and puddles. Noah stirred in the crook of Jason's arm, small noises mixing with the rhythm of rain. Jason adjusted the baby, keeping his head close to his chest, wrapping him deeper inside the jacket for warmth. The glow of a streetlight appeared ahead, orange and steady through the curtain of rain, signaling the approach of safety. Lila's grip on his sleeve tightened, and Jason squeezed back lightly, reminding her silently that she was doing the right thing. Ghost stopped at the intersection, lifted his head, and whined softly, ears pivoting toward the approaching sound of boots. Jason followed his line of sight and saw the first pair of responders approaching, raincoats glistening, flashlights cutting through the dark sheets of precipitation. Relief washed over him, tempered by the awareness of the distance still to cross. He lowered Noah slightly, showing the approaching figures. Lila's eyes widened as recognition sparked. The girl's shivering eased just a fraction, but she kept a hand on Ghost, as though he were the final piece keeping her balance. Jason called out in steady tones, "Over here. We have 2 children and a baby, safe for now." The responders angled their flashlights, assessing quickly, and nodded. A man, tall and broad in a yellow raincoat, stepped forward. "We have you," he said, voice calm but sure, and Jason felt the weight of exhaustion in his chest lessen slightly. He moved Lila closer to the responders, letting the dog stay beside her, but Ghost did not move from the threshold until Jason's hand lingered on the girl's shoulder. He checked Noah, ensuring the baby's face remained tucked into his chest, warmth preserved. The responders assessed the situation briefly, moving with practiced efficiency. One knelt to take Noah, adjusting the blanket over him. Another crouched to speak gently to Lila, asking her small questions, acknowledging her bravery. Jason stayed close, his own breaths, even despite the storm, watching as the children adjusted, understanding the world could be kind and steady, even when the night had been long. Ghost stayed by Lila, the dog's white coat now mottled with wet mud, but his presence unwavering. Jason felt a strange calm wash over him as the responders guided them to higher ground beyond the streetlight's pool. Water trickled along gutters, ran in small streams toward the creek, but no longer pressed against them. Jason stepped aside as the children were lifted onto dry pavement, his hands lingering for a heartbeat on each of them. Ghost brushed against Lila's side, giving a soft exhale through his nose, reassuring, grounding. Jason allowed himself a deep breath, feeling the tension of the night loosen incrementally. The responders communicated calmly, giving instructions and asking gentle questions. Lila looked up at Jason, eyes bright and wet, and he smiled faintly. "You did well," he said, low and soft. She nodded, squeezing Ghost one last time before allowing the adults to guide her and Noah to a dry waiting area. Jason's gaze swept over the empty street behind them, the cannery now a dark silhouette against the rain, and he felt a quiet satisfaction in the invisible threads that had led them safely through the night. Ghost stayed at the edge of the pavement, white and steady, waiting for Jason's final nod before he allowed the dog to follow, every step measured, careful, but free. Together, The three of them moved toward the responders, leaving the darkness behind, carrying the warmth of life, trust, and the quiet miracle of survival through the storm. The ambulance doors opened beneath the white glare of the emergency lights, and for a moment the whole world seemed made of rain, breath, and red reflections sliding across wet pavement. Jason stood beside the curb with Ghost at his left knee while the paramedics guided Lila onto the rear step and wrapped a thick thermal blanket around her shoulders. Noah was already inside, bundled in warm layers beneath the careful hands of a young emergency medical technician named Rachel, who spoke to him in a voice so soft it made the storm feel less powerful. Lila would not sit back until she could see her brother's face. Her small chin trembled, but her eyes stayed fixed on him with the fierce attention of someone who had spent the entire night believing love meant staying awake. "Is he breathing okay?" she asked. Rachel smiled, checking the baby with practiced gentleness. "He is breathing okay. He is cold and tired, but you kept him warm enough to give him a very good chance." Lila looked down at her lap, as if praise embarrassed her more than fear ever had. Jason saw it and understood. Some people carried courage like a medal. Others carried it like a secret they hoped no one would notice. Ghost placed his front paws on the ambulance step and lifted his nose toward Lila. A firefighter started to stop him, then saw the girl's hand reach for the dog and said nothing. Lila buried her fingers in Ghost's wet fur. "He found us," she whispered. "Twice." Jason stood in the rain, his jacket open, his shirt soaked through, his body beginning to feel the cold now that the mission no longer held him upright. He looked at Ghost. The dog's amber eyes were calm, but there was exhaustion in the slow rise and fall of his chest. Mud streaked his white coat. Rain darkened the fur along his back. Still, he would not step away until Lila released him. That was Ghost. That had always been Ghost. Loyal beyond command. Gentle beyond training. A county deputy arrived a few minutes later, followed by a woman in a navy coat who worked with family services and kept her voice low, respectful, careful not to turn the children's long night into a public scene. They asked Jason what he knew. He told them only what mattered, where he found them, how high the water had risen, how Lila had kept Noah wrapped, how she had sent every bit of warmth she had left into her little brother. He left out the parts that belonged to the soul and not the paperwork. The howl, the certainty in Ghost's eyes. The way the white dog had chosen the path before Jason even knew there was a path to choose. Those things were true, but some truths sounded smaller when spoken too soon. Lila watched him through the open ambulance doors. "Sergeant Cole?" Jason stepped closer. "I am. Right here. Will Ghost get in trouble for going through the fence?" A quiet laugh moved through the firefighters nearby, not mocking, just relieved to hear a child ask a question that belonged to a safer world. Jason shook his head. "No, ma'am. Tonight, he gets a pass." Lila nodded seriously, accepting this as official. Then she reached beneath the blanket and pulled something from her sleeve. The remaining pink mitten dangled there, damp and stretched, its yarn darkened by rain. She held it out to Jason. "I lost the other one," she said. "Near the fence." Jason took it gently. The tiny thing rested in his large palm like a piece of the night that had not given up. "I found it," he said. Her eyes widened. "You did? That was how I knew somebody was there." Lila looked at the mitten, then at Ghost, and her face changed. Not into joy. Not yet. Into wonder. The kind that comes when a child realizes the world, for all its coldness, had left a trail back to her. Rachel adjusted the blanket around Lila. "We need to get you and Noah checked at the hospital, sweetheart." Lila nodded, but her gaze stayed on Jason. "Are you coming?" The question was simple, but it found a place in him he had kept locked for years. Jason thought of his quiet rental house, the untouched coffee mug by the sink, the old dog tags on the nightstand, the emptiness that had learned his schedule. Then he looked at Noah sleeping beneath clean blankets, at Lila sitting upright though her whole body begged for rest, at Ghost waiting in the rain like a promise with pause. "Yes," he said, "I will follow right behind you." Lila leaned back then, finally allowing the blanket to hold her. Ghost stepped down from the ambulance and pressed his shoulder into Jason's leg. The paramedic closed one door, then paused before closing the other. Lila lifted her hand in a small wave. Ghost gave one quiet bark, soft enough not to wake Noah. The ambulance pulled away slowly, lights washing the wet street in red and white. Jason stood until it turned the corner toward Pine Harbor General. For the first time all night, the rain began to thin. Not stop, just soften, as if heaven itself had lowered its voice. Jason followed the ambulance through the sleeping streets of Pine Harbor with Ghost lying across the back seat, silent except for the slow sound of his breathing. The rain had become a mist by then, soft enough to gather on the windshield like breath on glass. Streetlights passed over Jason's hands on the steering wheel, one gold circle after another, and each one seemed to pull him farther from the cannery and closer to something he did not yet know how to name. Pine Harbor General sat on a low hill above town, a brick building with wide windows and a blue emergency sign glowing over the entrance. By the time Jason parked, the ambulance crew had already brought Lila and Noah inside. He clipped Ghost's leash to his collar, though they both knew the dog would not wander, and walked through the automatic doors into the warm smell of antiseptic, coffee, and clean linen. A nurse at the desk looked up, ready to ask a question, then saw Ghost's mud-streaked white coat and Jason's soaked shirt and seemed to understand enough. "They are in exam room 3, she said gently. The little girl asked if the white dog could wait nearby. Jason nodded once. "Thank you, ma'am." Ghost walked beside him down the bright hallway, his paws leaving faint wet marks on the polished floor. The hospital was quiet at that hour, not empty, but hushed, filled with the soft beeping of monitors, the rolling wheels of carts, the distant murmur of nurses speaking in careful voices. Jason paused outside exam room 3. Through the half-open door, he saw Lila sitting on a bed with a blanket around her shoulders, her hair towel-dried, her cheeks still pale, but touched now by warmth. Noah slept in a clear hospital bassinet beside her, wrapped in a fresh white blanket with tiny blue stripes. A doctor listened to his breathing with a stethoscope, then smiled at Rachel, the emergency medical technician. That smile told Jason more than words. Lila saw him in the doorway and sat up straighter. "You came." Jason stepped inside, Ghost just behind his leg. "I said I would." She looked past him. Ghost came too. At the sound of his name, Ghost moved forward, slow and respectful, as if he knew hospitals. Required softer pause. Lila reached down. The dog laid his head gently on the edge of the bed, and she placed her hand between his ears. For the first time since Jason had found her, Lila closed her eyes. Not from fear, from rest. The doctor turned to Jason. "They were cold, but you got them here in time. The baby is stable. The girl is exhausted, but she is going to be all right." Jason breathed out through his nose. It was the kind of breath a man releases when a weight finally sets itself down. "She did most of it," he said. The doctor looked at Lila, then at Noah. "I believe that." Lila opened her eyes, embarrassed by the attention, and looked at Jason. "I was scared the whole time." Jason pulled a chair closer, but did not sit yet. "Courage does not mean you were not scared." She waited. Ghost's amber eyes watched him from beside the bed. Jason continued, quieter. "It means you kept loving somebody while you were scared." Lila looked down at Noah. Her fingers moved through Ghost's damp fur. Then Ghost was brave too. Jason almost smiled. Ghost has been showing off that way for years. The corner of Lila's mouth lifted, small but real. Outside the window, the first gray light of morning began to soften the sky over Pine Harbor. Dawn did not arrive all at once. It came slowly, touching the edges of the parking lot, the wet roofs, the bare winter trees, the hospital glass. Jason noticed it because Ghost noticed it. The dog lifted his head and turned toward the window, ears relaxed now, body finally allowing fatigue to show. Lila followed his gaze. "He knew where we were," she whispered. "I do not know how." Jason looked at the white shepherd, then at the sleeping baby, then at the child who had held on through a night that would have frightened many grown adults. There were answers people liked because they fit into forms and reports. Open gates, strong scent, good training, lucky timing. Maybe all of that was true. But Jason had lived long enough to know that truth sometimes wore more than one coat. "Some dogs hear things we miss," he said. "And sometimes, God sends help with muddy paws." Lila considered this seriously. Then she nodded, as if the explanation matched what her heart already knew. A woman from family services stepped into the room a few minutes later and spoke quietly with the nurse. There would be calls to make, safe places to arrange, people to locate, meals to bring, paperwork to sign. Life would not become simple just because sunrise had arrived. Jason knew that. Grace did not erase every hard road. It only made sure someone did not have to walk it alone. Before they moved Noah to a warmer room, Lila reached for Jason's hand. Her fingers were still cool, but steadier now. Can Ghost visit again? Jason looked at the dog. Ghost leaned against his leg, tired and noble and smelling like rain, mud, and miracles. Yes, Jason said. We can visit. Lila looked relieved, then sleepy. Good. Noah likes him. Noah slept through this judgment, peaceful beneath the striped blanket. The nurse dimmed the overhead light. Ghost settled on the floor beside Lila's bed without being asked, resting his head on his paws, eyes half closed but still watching the room. Jason finally sat down in the chair. The old emptiness inside him was still there, but it had changed shape. It no longer felt like a room with the lights out. It felt like a door left open. Morning spread across the window. Lila slept. Noah breathed softly. Ghost kept guard. And Jason Cole, who had believed for too long that his best days of saving anyone were behind him, bowed his head in the quiet hospital room and understood that some missions do not begin with orders. Some begin with a sound in the night, a child who refuses to give up, and a white dog who knows exactly where mercy is waiting.